I was the crown princess. The crown prince and I once loved each other deeply in our youth, but I was betrayed by his concubine. Over time, we drifted apart, and in the end, I was imprisoned and died in confinement. The crown prince was struck by regret, consumed by grief, and wished he could follow me in death. Moved by his sorrow, Mengpa granted me a chance to be reborn. She asked, "Shall I send you back to your early days of marriage?" Back then, we were deeply in love, perfectly in tune with each other. But I shook my head. If he truly loved me, how could he bear to see me suffer and turn a blind eye? In the 5th year of my marriage, tormented by illness and confined to a secluded courtyard, I died. The one who set me off was Lu Ning, the prince's concubine, with a bowl of poison medicine. Dying with injustice, my spirit lingered above the eastern palace, unwilling to leave. 2 days later, the crown prince, Li Siheng, stumbled into the courtyard, clutching my lifeless body as he wailed in agony, nearly fainting from grief. He wept, questioning why I had been so stubborn, why I refused to admit fault, why I hid my illness and insisted on dying apart from him. Then, my former maid trembled as she knelt before him. She accused Lu Ning not only of hiding news of my critical illness, but also of orchestrating the scheme that led to my imprisonment. Furious, the crown prince interrogated Lu Ning overnight and reopened the old case. The once beloved beauty was thrown into the dungeon, tortured until life became worse than death. Lu Ning's father and brothers were stripped of their ranks, their entire family imprisoned, living in constant fear. Even the servants in the secluded courtyard who had mistreated me were flogged and cast out of the palace. "Ah, I misunderstood you. I have avenged you," Li Siheng murmured, clutching the embroidered pouch I had sewn for him in our youth. As he spoke, sorrow overwhelmed him, and he collapsed into unconsciousness. Again and again, grief consumed him, and his health deteriorated rapidly. He was bedridden with a severe illness. The Empress came to see him, only to find him sobbing uncontrollably. "Mother, if only I had believed Ayu, would she still be here? If I were to follow her in death, perhaps she could forgive me in the afterlife." On the bridge of forgetfulness, there was a massive mirror of reincarnation. Those with deep regrets could see the things they yearned for most after death reflected in its surface. Nearby, a group of chattering female ghosts whispered, "This is the classic, too little, too late, redemption arc. The heroine suffered so much, but the hero is pitiful too." Mengpa held a bowl of soup, watching as I stared intently at the mirror. In the mortal world, Li Siheng looked like a man barely clinging to life. With a sigh, she said, "True love is rare in this world. I shall grant you another chance. Return and live again." When would you like to go back to? When? My short life had lasted only 22 years. From the moment I married Li Siheng at 17, I had been walking toward darkness. Seeing my silence, Mengpa asked again, "Shall I send you back to your newlywed days? If you can avoid the events that drove you apart, you may live a life of happiness. This time, be wary of that concubine to prevent misunderstandings," she advised. Back to the wedding. At 17, I had worn a lavish bridal gown, throwing myself into the embrace of the man I had loved for so long, like a rose in full bloom. At that time, our love was pure, filled with passion. When Li Siheng was not attending to court affairs, he spent every moment with me. The Eastern Palace's back courtyard remained empty. He had no other concubines. I managed everything, from the smallest household matters to the grandest affairs. Even the children in the streets knew how much the crown prince cherished his wife. His betrothal gifts stretched from the Eastern Palace all the way to the Duke's manor, making every noblewoman in the capital envious. And yet, in the mirror of reincarnation, people tried to comfort Li Siheng, saying that life and death were beyond his control. It was not his fault. It was the work of scheming villains. Lu Ning had deceived him, driven by jealousy, and her wicked schemes had taken my life. Li Siheng, they said, had simply misjudged people, had been blinded by lies. A single mistake had cost him the woman he loved.
Ha!
Under Meng Po's puzzled gaze, I shook my head firmly. I refuse. If I must go back, send me to the moment before the imperial decree for marriage was issued. If he truly loved me, how could he bear to see me suffer and turn a blind eye?
Plus,
As I wished, I returned to the age of 16, before I was bestowed in marriage to Li Siheng. Outside the small courtyard of the Duke's manor, the spring sunlight was just right. I stretched out my hand. My fair skin was smooth and unblemished, with no trace of the wounds that had covered me in my past life's final moments. How wonderful! Xiao Qiu, my maid, ran in from outside, her face brimming with excitement. Miss, the sixth prince is here again. The warm room instantly turned lively, like water brought to a boil, as the maids began chattering away. One said, "I wonder what new trinket His Highness brought this time." Another giggled, "The gift doesn't matter. He's obviously here to see our young lady." Li Siheng and I had known each other since childhood. Back then, his mother had not yet been made empress, and he was not yet the crown prince. When my father was young, he followed His Majesty in campaigns across the land, earning great military merit. After inheriting my grandfather's title, he was later promoted to duke. After coming of age, Li Siheng often visited our residence to discuss political affairs with my father. Each time, he would bring me a small gift, sometimes a popular trinket from the market, other times a handmade craft of his own. Whenever he came, I would run eagerly to see him. Like any young girl in love, I would wait outside my father's study, stealing glances, just to exchange a few private words with him after their discussions ended. After delivering her message, Xiao Qiu urged me excitedly, "Miss, hurry. Go see him." I looked at Xiao Qiu, pressed my lips into a smile, but remained still. Xiao Qiu was Li Siheng's person. She was the very maid who, in my past life, had screamed and cried, accusing Lu Ning only after my death. She was born into our household, yet had secretly maintained contact with Li Siheng. I had known this. Li Siheng once told me he had given Xiao Qiu extra silver to win favor with my maids, hoping they would speak well of him and take even better care of me. Blinded by love in my past life, I had believed him, never guarded against Xiao Qiu. Instead, I had been deeply touched that even my personal maids were looked after by Li Siheng. But if she had truly been loyal to me, why did she wait until I was dead to expose Lu Ning? Having lived another life, I understood the truth. My personal maid could never serve another master. A servant who serves two masters is disloyal. I smirked slightly at Xiao Qiu and said, "Why are you in such a rush? Is there a gift for you as well?" For a brief moment, she froze before hastily kneeling. This servant wouldn't dare. I said nothing. The silence stretched on, making her grow more anxious. Only then did I speak slowly. "You're not young anymore. From today onward, you'll go serve my brother." Seeing the faint joy flash across her face, I didn't bother explaining further. My brother was strict in military discipline, and the maids and guards in his courtyard were trained like soldiers. There was no room for any untoward thoughts. If her mind wandered so easily, she could go to a place where she'd have no time for such distractions. After sending Xiao Qiu away, I took advantage of the beautiful sunlight and picked up a few books to read. Noticing my unusual behavior, one of the remaining maids hesitated before asking, "Miss, aren't you going to the front hall?" Turning a page, I instructed, "My father and the sixth prince are discussing state affairs. It's not my place to intrude. From now on, when he visits, don't report it to me." Sweeping my gaze across the room, my tone grew heavier. "You are in my household. I will not treat you unfairly. But you must remember who your true master is." I never understood what those ghosts in the underworld meant by a wife-chasing crematorium. But since the burial had already happened, there was no need to dig up the corpse. I refused to go to the mountain, yet the mountain came to block my way. On my way back to the manor from a flower appreciation banquet with my close friends, my carriage suddenly stopped. Outside the window, Li Siheng's clear voice rang out. Ah, you fifth prince uncle has returned. Come with me to visit him. In public, I had no way to refuse, so I had no choice but to follow him. On the way, Li Siheng tested the waters, asking, "Why don't I see your personal maid?" Feigning ignorance, I replied, "Is your highness referring to Xiao Qiu? She has gone to serve my brother." He didn't ask further. The fifth prince was the emperor's full-blooded brother, holding a high position in both court and military affairs. Yet despite his status, he was a man of deep affection. His late wife was my aunt, who perished on the battlefield in Beijiang 7 years ago. Since then, he never remarried and had no children of his own. Instead, he treated us younger generation as his own. Because I bore a strong resemblance to my aunt, he always favored me the most. In my past life, when the fifth prince returned to court, Li Siheng had also invited me to visit him together. At that time, we were secretly in love, and I had pleaded with the fifth prince to look after Li Siheng. He agreed and extended his support in court multiple times, giving Li Siheng a crucial advantage among the imperial princes. This time, I chose to sit in the front hall and keep my mouth shut. The fifth prince's gaze lingered between us before he finally spoke. "Ayu, did you come here with the sixth prince?" Had I not been reborn, I would have blushed and lowered my head at this moment, subtly hinting at my deep affection for Li Siheng. But now, I simply smiled and shook my head. I ran into His Highness on the way here, so we happened to come together. The Minister of Personnel was in mourning, and the fifth prince was temporarily overseeing the ministry. Li Siheng wanted to transfer 2 of his trusted officials from the provinces back to the capital, and he had come today for this matter. However, when he brought it up, the fifth prince remained noncommittal, neither agreeing nor refusing. Under the table, Li Siheng lightly tapped the toe of my shoe. I frowned and shifted my position slightly. He shot me another meaningful look, but I simply lowered my gaze and focused on the tea in my hands. In the past, it was always like this. Before he became crown prince, whenever he had a scheme, all he needed was a glance, and I would immediately understand how to assist him. He had once told me that I was destined to be his crown princess, that our fates were intertwined, and that our fortunes rose and fell together. And so they did, until he secured his position as heir. Then he began to doubt me, to doubt my father and brother. In this life, I would not help him again. Not even a little. As we left the fifth prince's residence, Li Siheng was visibly displeased. "Ayu, what was wrong with you today? You ignored me the entire time in the main hall." I stopped in my tracks, gave him a proper bow, and replied, "I am but a woman. I should not interfere in political affairs, nor should I meddle in your highness's matters." Li Siheng froze. "You know I don't think that way. You and I have always been of one heart." One heart? I laughed coldly in my heart. Just now, I had repeated the very words he once said to me when Green Ning framed me in my past life. "Ah, you should not have meddled in politics, nor should you have meddled in my affairs. Accept your punishment and reflect on your mistakes in seclusion." A beautiful beginning, a tragic end, his every word cut to the bone. Everyone believed that Li Siheng had been deceived by schemers and had misunderstood me. But why didn't he investigate further? Why was he so quick to believe? Why did he use me as an excuse to strike at my father and brother? People see only what they already hold in their hearts. I refused Li Siheng's offer to escort me home and climbed into my carriage alone. "Miss, His Highness is still standing there watching you," whispered my young maid, stealing a glance through the window. "But I am no longer standing in place," I murmured. After that day, I deliberately avoided Li Siheng, feigning illness to skip every social gathering where he might appear. My parents grew concerned and came to ask me if the sixth prince had wronged me. Tears welled up in my eyes. "Father, mother, I no longer wish to be tied to the sixth prince." My father sighed deeply. "I have long suspected that the sixth prince is too calculating. He is not a good match. But now, it may not be easy to break free."
My nose stung.
So, in my past life, my father had already seen through Li Siheng's ambitions. He simply never spoke up, for fear of hurting me. By my calculations, the time for marriage discussions was approaching. I had to act now to change my fate. In my past life, Lee Si-hung had not secured his position solely because of my support and my father and brother's aid. His mother, though born from a lesser branch of the prestigious Cui family of Qinghe, had been favored and later registered under the main lineage. At this moment, she had already been promoted to consorta and was basking in the emperor's favor. Other noble families might refuse her invitations, but my mother received one from consorta and could not decline. Thus, she had to bring me along. At the banquet, consorta warmly took my hand and had me sit beside her. "Ah, I haven't seen you in a while. Have you and Si-hung had a falling out?" I remained respectful, but deliberately distant. "Forgive me, Your Highness, but I dare not presume to be worthy of the sixth prince." Consorta had a servant bring out a jewelry box. Inside was a jade bracelet, its texture fine and luster smooth. This was a gift from my mother when I married. "I am getting older, but young ladies like you will wear it beautifully. Take it. If Si-hung has done anything wrong, consider this my apology on his behalf." Many eyes turned toward us. This bracelet, given to consorta upon her marriage, was one of her most treasured dowry items. In my past life, she only passed it down to me after my wedding. If I accepted it now, my entanglement with Lee Si-hung would be even harder to sever. Realizing this, I hurriedly performed a deep bow, firmly refusing. "This bracelet is far too valuable. I cannot possibly accept it. Your Highness, please retract your order." Consorta's expression cooled slightly, but she merely remarked that Lee Si-hung and I had grown up together and need not be so formal. During the banquet, a servant came to relay a message. His Highness the Sixth Prince was waiting for me in the rear courtyard. If I refused to go, he would come find me in front of everyone. Left with no choice, I went. The moment we met, Lee Si-hung angrily reached for my hand, but I stepped back. What is wrong with you? You even refused my mother's gift." I kept my distance. "Your Highness, such a dowry item should be reserved for your future crown princess." Lee Si-hung stared at me in disbelief. What do you mean by this?" I met his eyes. Lee Si-hung's eyes had always been deep and gentle. Once, I had seen my whole world reflected in them. Even now, they held nothing but me. But I knew that beneath their calm surface lurked boundless ambition and desire, a force that would one day consume me entirely. "I was young and foolish before," I said, enunciating each word. "Now I understand. I have no romantic feelings for your Highness. Please, for the sake of my reputation, stop seeking me out in the future." I turned to leave. "I do not allow it." Lee Si-hung's urgent voice rang out behind me, and his footsteps suggested he was about to chase after me. But for some reason, he stopped. Curious, I glanced back. Just one look, and a chill spread through my entire body. Standing before him, blocking his way, was Green Ning. In my past life, the concubine Livnong entered the Eastern Palace in the second year of my marriage to Lee Si-hung. That year, Lee Si-hung was ambushed in the streets. Livnong, a noble lady who happened to be passing by, risked her life to save him and was seriously injured. Lee Si-hung brought her back to the Eastern Palace and summoned the imperial physicians to treat her. I, too, stayed up all night by her side, hoping she would wake up soon. 2 days later, Livnong regained consciousness. But the first thing she did was kneel before me, saying that she had long admired Lee Si-hung and begging for my mercy, pleading to be allowed into the Eastern Palace, even if only as a mere maidservant by his side. I was stunned and instinctively looked at Lee Si-hung, only to see a flicker of emotion in his eyes. In the end, Livnong stayed. My elder brother, distressed on my behalf, treated Lee Si-hung with a cold attitude in court for days. Lee Si-hung had once promised my father and brother that before I bore the eldest son, there would be no newcomers in his household. Feeling guilty toward me, he only granted Livnong the title of a noble concubine. But even so, Livnong still came between us, prying open a rift. On nights when Lee Si-hung stayed with me, she would send someone to report that the wound she took for him was aching, prompting him to leave me in the middle of the night. When I danced under the moonlight, She would sit to the side and secretly weep, lamenting that her injury had ruined her body, making it impossible for her to dance again. Lee Si-hung would then order the musicians to stop playing. Though he never scolded me, I could see the tenderness he felt for her in his eyes. At that moment, I, who had never feared any situation, stood under the moon, completely at a loss. In this life, I watched from afar as Nong lifted her face, gazing at Lee Si-hung with eager anticipation. So, they had met this early, long before I ever knew. For the present Wenyu, this was the first time witnessing Lee Si-hung pause for Nong. But for the reborn Wenyu, I had seen it countless times before, so many that my heart no longer ached. Without another glance, I turned and walked away. And so, I missed the moment when Lee Si-hung's expression turned cold and he shook off Nong's hand. I knew Lee Si-hung wouldn't give up so easily, but I never expected him to act so recklessly, going straight to plead with the emperor. When I heard the news, I was so shocked that I shattered my teacup. In my past life, the emperor had officially bestowed our marriage only after Lee Si-hung took control of the Eastern Palace. On normal days, he and Consort Da often tried to win my father and brother over, but always in private. Even the jade bracelet Consort Da gave me ahead of time. This had only happened in this life. Before my betrothal, my father had never openly supported the sixth prince. Even after my marriage, he voluntarily relinquished half of his military power. After all, while the emperor was still alive, princes vying for the throne had to build alliances yet remain cautious not to appear too ambitious and provoke imperial suspicion. Lee Si-hung was a calculating man. He knew this well. So, why was he suddenly so impatient? I soon found out. At the palace banquet, I had embarrassed Consort Da, refusing to accept her gift. To the noble families present, this was a clear signal. The only young lady of the Guogong mansion, Wenyu, was not engaged to the sixth prince, Lee Si-hung. There was only one crown prince, but the emperor had many sons, all eyeing the throne. Some, bolder than the rest, had already leaped over the low walls of my family's rear courtyard. As it happened, I had been waiting for him for some time. Feigning anger, I rebuked. "Where does this thief come from, daring to trespass into the Guogong mansion?" The man laughed, the wind brushing against the hem of his robes like a clear moonlit breeze. "If the young lady does not wish to see me, then I shall leave." I merely cast him a glance before inviting him down for tea. The visitor was the ninth prince, Lee Si-hung. His maternal family was not prominent, but he shared a connection with my mother. He was easygoing and fond of wielding swords and spears. We had fought and played together since childhood, but as I grew closer to Lee Si-hung, I gradually became distant from him. My father, a military man, had always held the highest regard for the ninth prince among all the emperor's sons, believing he possessed a broad vision and the makings of a benevolent ruler. But alas, his maternal family had declined, and I had insisted on marrying Lee Si-hung. After jumping down, Lee Si-hung grinned at me and asked, "Little Wenyu, how will you thank me?" I simply handed him a plate of chestnut cakes. "Will this be enough?" Lee Si-hung immediately called it a losing deal. I glared at him. "If not for you, the sixth prince wouldn't have gone to the emperor so soon. And yet you still dare ask for thanks." As it turned out, this scoundrel had provoked Lee Si-hung and spread the rumor that he intended to marry the young lady of the Wen family, forcing Lee Si-hung to directly seek the emperor's decree. Lee Si-hung's eyes curved with amusement. "Little Wenyu, do you truly not wish to marry sixth brother?" I nodded, utterly certain. If sixth brother loses the support of the Guogong mansion, his path to the throne will be much harder, Lee Si-hung joked. "What does that have to do with me?" I said, watching him with interest. "The Guogong mansion supporting the ninth prince is not out of the question." The crisp sound of birdsong outside made the silence inside even more pronounced. Lee Si-hung looked at me deeply, his playful expression slowly fading. "Wenyu, do you understand what you are saying?" I met his gaze squarely, my expression calm and unwavering. "If the ninth prince helps me, I will help the ninth prince in return." After a moment, Lee Si-hung raised his teacup and offered a toast. "Then let us wish Miss Wen May you get what you desire. The second time I saw Lu Ning by Li Sihing's side was at Princess Rujia's coming-of-age ceremony. Lu Ning was alluring, standing beside Li Sihing like a radiant pomegranate blossom in May. In my past life, after I was imprisoned, it was Lu Ning who remained by Li Sihing's side. Though merely a concubine, she came from a noble family and was adept at social maneuvering. As time passed, the world only knew of the esteemed concubine Lu Ning, while the name of Crown Princess Wen Yu faded into obscurity. And that imprisonment was nothing more than a trap meticulously designed by Lu Ning against me. At that time, enemy forces were invading, and my father and brother led their troops to war. Li Siqing suggested sending a few of his subordinate officers along. He spoke casually, claiming they needed battlefield experience and would assist my father and brother. But we all understood. He was merely trying to plant his own people in the military. A political marriage could never compare to holding military power in his own hands. My father didn't object at first. Now that the crown prince had been established, he remained loyal to the emperor and the heir. Eventually, the Wen family's army would belong to Li Sihing. But my father refused to let Shao Qi accompany the campaign. He said Shao Qi was cunning and ruthless, incapable of strategy or combat, skilled only in twisting situations to his advantage and finding fault in others. As an advisor, he could be controlled. But in the military, he would only chill the hearts of the soldiers. My father was unwavering in his loyalty. But I still remember the look of suspicion in Li Sihing's eyes when he heard this. He asked me if my father didn't trust his confidant, Shao Qi. I denied it resolutely, saying that my father and brother cared only for military affairs and had no part in political struggles, nor would they ever waver in their allegiance to him. How laughable. A few days later, at a family banquet, Shao Qi died of poisoning after drinking a cup of wine. The wine had also touched Lu Ning's lips. Though the imperial physician saved her, she was left infertile for life. In the end, the blame fell on me. The East Palace was a deep, shadowed courtyard, and without any serious investigation, Li Sihing condemned me. By then, my father and brother had already marched to the northern border. Li Sihing sealed off all news in the East Palace. No one knew that the crown princess had been framed and imprisoned in a secluded courtyard. Until I died of illness. I hadn't planned to step forward, but Lu Ning's gaze had been fixed on me from the moment I entered the courtyard. One family's elder sister, I've long heard of your great name. It's an honor to meet you today. I smiled faintly. No need for formalities. A glimmer of amusement flickered in Lu Ning's eyes. In the future, once sister enters the palace first, I will have to pay my respects to you. In my past life, Lu Ning had provoked me like this countless times in secret. Yet, in front of Li Sihing, she always played the role of a weak and obedient girl. Sister, please don't be angry. Lu Ning would never dare to overstep you. Suddenly, with a loud thud, Lu Ning knelt at my feet, appearing as if I had pushed her down. Her pitiful cry echoed, her beautiful eyes full of helpless sorrow. I didn't even need to turn around. I already knew Li Sihing had arrived. What happened? Are you hurt? His urgent voice rang out behind me. The next moment, a strong force pulled me around. Are you all right? I met Li Sihing's gaze, stunned. He didn't even spare Lu Ning a glance. His expression was shattered, his eyes painfully familiar, as if, you, come and keep Rujia company. The little princess's crisp, commanding voice rang out. Who let this filth into my coming-of-age ceremony? Lu Ning lay awkwardly on the ground. No one dared to help her. She had no choice but to scramble to her feet and apologize to Rujia in disgrace. I followed Rujia away from the crowd. The princess leaned in and whispered mischievously, you. Ninth brother sent me to fetch you. I turned slightly, meeting Li Siqing's gaze from across the room. Seeing me look over, he raised his wine cup in a distant toast. In recent days, I had become the most talked-about figure among the noble families of the capital. No surprise there, shortly after the sixth prince petitioned the emperor for a marriage decree, the ninth prince also sought to marry Wen Yu of the Wen family. I didn't know how Li Siqing, An unfavored prince managed it, but the emperor actually said he would give him a chance. When family's youngest daughter, two of my sons hold you in their hearts. Which one do you choose? Feeling the weight of two gazes upon me, I closed my eyes briefly before hearing my own voice, crisp and clear in the silent hall. I have long admired the ninth prince, and hope your majesty will grant my wish.
Are you?
Li Sihing's eyes widened in disbelief, bloodshot with emotion. In my peripheral vision, I saw his right hand trembling uncontrollably. I pretended not to notice. Li Siqing knelt beside me, his face alight with sincere joy. Father, please grant us this marriage. In the end, the emperor gave his blessing. As I left the hall, Li Sihing pushed past his attendants, insisting on reaching me, only to be blocked by Li Siqing. Sixth brother, Ayu is my fiancé now. Please show some respect. Ayu. Li Sihing stared at me, his pain unmistakably genuine. Then he turned to glare at Li Siqing, his voice laced with scorn. Even if you abandon your fief, you are no match for me. You will never be able to keep her. In my past life, Li Sihing's true rival was never the ninth prince, but the third prince, whose maternal family was equally powerful. Their battle had raged fiercely in the final year, and with the fifth prince and me supporting him, Li Sihing had ultimately won. He had swiftly overthrown the third prince and secured his place as crown prince. Li Siqing let out a short laugh. Sixth brother needn't concern himself with my matters. Lu Ning is still waiting for you outside the palace. Lu Ning and I have nothing between us. I will never marry her. Li Sihing desperately tried to explain. I lowered my gaze. Your affairs with Lu Ning have nothing to do with me. As I walked past him, I moved slowly, just like the 15 years I had now left behind. In this lifetime, when you and Li Sihing were finally severed. After leaving the palace, I asked Li Siqing what had happened. Though he came from humble origins, his mother had once been deeply favored by the emperor. She passed away early, becoming the emperor's untouchable, cherished memory. In my past life, though the emperor never considered him as heir, he had paved a path for him early on. Through military achievements, Li Siqing earned a prince's title, commanded his own troops, and was granted a prosperous fief in Ludong. The land was rich and bountiful, and even when I died, he was living comfortably in his domain. These arrangements stemmed from the emperor's rare guilt for a lost concubine and a capable son. Li Siqing had used it in exchange for the right to marry me. Good thing you didn't waver at the last moment. Li Siqing teased with a smile. Strangely, I didn't feel relieved. Li Sihing's behavior was unsettling. In my past life, at this point, he had still been patient and restrained. He wouldn't have acted so impulsively. The way he looked at me was too deep, like a whirlpool, too much like the crown prince I saw in the mirror of rebirth. A chill crept over me as I glanced back. Li Sihing, had he also been reborn? What happened next confirmed my suspicions. Li Sihing's path to seizing the throne was even smoother than in the previous life. Not a single one of the third prince's traps ensnared him. Instead, it was the third prince's own disgraceful secrets that were unearthed by Li Sihing in advance, shattering the emperor's expectations. In the past life, they had been evenly matched, but in this life, the difference between them was vast. However, Li Sihing encountered a new opponent, the ninth prince, Li Siqing. Li Sihing recruited strategists and used the imperial examination system to plant his own people within the 6 ministries. Without his previous marriage alliance with the Wen family, he moved even more aggressively, his methods increasingly unscrupulous. The first engagement gift I gave the ninth prince was Shao-Chi, that venomous snake who had once lurked at Li Sihing's side in the previous life. When Shao-Chi's half-foreign lineage was exposed, Li Sihing staggered, unable to steady himself. The emperor, in a fit of rage, hurled an inkstone at his forehead. He did not dodge, allowing the blood to trickle freely down his temple. I was not close to him, yet I seemed to sense his lips moving in a silent murmur. He was saying, "I'm sorry." Having lived another life, He finally understood why his father and brother had adamantly refused to let Xiaoqi accompany him. They had seen through his true nature. Unfortunately, they had not uncovered the deeper truth before hastily heading north. In this life, Li Siheng still attempted to plant Xiaoqi within the Ninth Prince's ranks. However, we had already investigated him thoroughly. Branded a traitor for colluding with the enemy, Xiaoqi was publicly executed. On the day of Xiaoqi's beheading, Li Siqing, accompanied by his trusted generals, personally came to thank me. Since our reunion, this was the first time he had truly shown me respect, more sincere than even when we had first allied, when I pledged the Wen family's support. This man, had he entered the army, could have caused unimaginable disaster. On behalf of my brothers-in-arms, Siqing thanks my lady. His confidence, eyes gleaming, teased him about how he had found himself an exceptional wife. I understood his intent. He was solidifying my authority before his inner circle, establishing my position as their mistress. From that moment on, I would hold sway even among his personal guards. I stood still and accepted his salute, merely responding, "The Wen family has always come from a line of soldiers." My mother was from the renowned Xie family, a prestigious scholarly lineage with a century of honor. My grandfather was revered among scholars, his disciples spread across the land. He submitted a petition to the emperor, revealing that the Ninth Prince's late mother, before entering the palace, had once been his student and had even saved my mother's life. He requested that the deceased concubine Chen be posthumously recognized as his adopted daughter and added to the Xie family records. The emperor agreed, and even conferred a posthumous consort title upon her. With that, Li Siqing, who had been of humble maternal origins, suddenly found himself with the Xie family as his backing. I heard that, at home, Li Siheng smashed an entire set of teacups in fury. After my engagement to Li Siqing, Li Siheng elevated Livnin to the status of honored concubine. Yet, on the day she entered his household, he did not stay to accompany her. Instead, he came to the Wen estate, insisting on seeing me. I refused, but he waited in the front hall, leaving my father with no choice but to allow it. When I finally arrived, Li Siheng's expression softened with a rare smile. "Ah, you're finally willing to see me." I stood several paces away, cold and distant. You've returned as well, haven't you? That's good. It's really good that you're still alive." I was growing impatient. Now that I knew Li Siheng had also been reborn, whatever little patience I had left for him vanished completely. If he had died without ever realizing anything, I could have simply treated him as a stranger. But since he had relived everything, I could only wish to tear him apart, to exact vengeance for the torment and death I had suffered in that previous life. "I never loved Livnin," he said, eyes filled with longing. "You'll see that soon enough. When all of this is over, will you come back to me?" "Impossible." I refused without hesitation. His gaze darkened, turning sharp and dangerous. "Don't tell me you've actually fallen for the Ninth Prince?" Li Siheng. For the first time since my rebirth, I spoke his name seriously. "Li Siheng, did you only realize Livnin was a problem after I died?" For a fleeting moment, panic flashed across his face, just as I had expected. "Let me ask another question. If Livnin had truly been a woman who loved you wholeheartedly, would you have killed her and exterminated her entire clan for me?" Li Siheng opened his mouth, looking uncertain. "But she wasn't." Then he abruptly paused, realization dawning. "You knew. You knew Livnin was." "Yes, I knew. I had known all along that Livnin belonged to the Third Prince. And I had also long realized that Li Siheng knew it too. So, when Livnin knelt before me, begging for recognition as his concubine, I did not refuse. I had believed that, as husband and wife, we shared an unshakable trust and tacit understanding. I had been willing to stand beside him, facing both open and hidden threats together. That was why, the first time I saw tenderness in his eyes toward Livnin, I was as bewildered as a lost child. Hadn't we agreed to play along with her deception, to use her as bait? Or was his performance so convincing that, for a moment, I had actually believed he would make the act real? Because I had known, I had never warned my father and brother about what was happening in our household. That was why, in the end, I was imprisoned in the side courtyard, with no way to call for help. Shao Qi's death had been nothing more than a convenient move for Li Siheng. He had enjoyed Livnin's affection, indulged her schemes, and only when the time was right, exposed her as the third prince's spy to deliver a fatal blow. But when you went along with it, was the third prince your only target? Li Siheng opened and closed his mouth as if searching for an explanation, but to me, both he and Livnin were equally loathsome. He had sought to kill two birds with one stone. And the second bird was me and the Wen family. First, by using Livnin's false accusations and Shao Qi's death to pressure me and my family into submission. My father and brother had always been upright and principled. Even after I married Li Siheng, they never abused their military power for his sake. Yet he had coveted my brother's command for years. Then, once Livnin's identity as a spy was exposed, he could use my unjust suffering as leverage against the third prince, utterly crushing him. If my guess was correct, even in the underworld, the deeply affectionate crown prince who had moved both Meng Pe and the female ghost was nothing more than a carefully staged act by Li Siheng. Killing only Livnin would never have been enough. The crown princess had to be poisoned. The crown prince had to be reduced to a hollow shell. This performance had to ensure that the third prince's faction would never rise again. Not long after Li Siheng unwillingly left, news arrived from the sixth prince's residence that Li Siheng had been attacked, with the assassin being the third prince's spy, Lu Ning. Lu Ning was beheaded and displayed for the public, and those within the noble families of the capital who were loyal to the third prince were uprooted. The third prince suffered a huge blow and was no longer able to rival Li Siheng. So you see, he had the ability to eliminate Lu Ning in one stroke and to prevent me from suffering so much injustice. During the intense struggle between the third and sixth princes, Li Siqing moved like a monster in the dark, rapidly growing his own power. With my almost prophetic guidance, some of the third prince's forces, which hadn't yet been absorbed by Li Siheng, were seized by Li Siqing. The emperor's eagle-like gaze finally fell on this youngest son, who had military power and support from the clean officials. I know Li Siheng all too well. I know everything he has done that should never be revealed, things that can't be brought up. After we broke ties, I no longer showed mercy. One poke, and I hit a nerve. He would never abandon his trusted subordinates and power for me. All I could do was defend myself, but his power was immense, far stronger than Li Siqing's, and for a time, it was hard to distinguish between them. Until father and brother received the order to march north. In the last life, by this point, Li Siheng had already taken the throne in the Eastern Palace. Li Siqing was content in his fief in Ludong, and I was about to face the tragedy of house arrest. This time, because of the ninth prince, the position of crown prince had not yet been decided. As the timeline moved forward, both Li Siheng and I were about to lose our greatest advantages. On the seventh day after father and brother left, chaos broke out in the capital. I was kidnapped and, upon waking, found myself in the imperial palace. Li Siheng stood before the Hall of Supreme Harmony, holding a blood-stained sword. His expression was just like the crown prince in my previous life, cold, proud, gloomy, and sinister. Li Siqing, who had been injured and forced to hold on, was supported by his trusted generals, still fighting to resist. I was dragged to Li Siheng's side, and he caressed my face, his expression tender. I told you, he couldn't keep you. He turned and shouted at Li Siqing. Ninth brother, if you surrender, your wife and soldiers will be safe. Amidst the clash of blades, Li Siqing stood beneath the steps, cutting off the necks of attackers with his sword. He looked at me, his face covered in blood, but his eyes remained bright. He asked me, do you think, after all this, he will make a good emperor? The cold wind blew, and I felt a sting in my nose. It seemed that Li Siqing had always known. I pointed out that his strategies to counter Li Siheng were too sharp and quick. Some messages hadn't even reached the capital before I already knew. He guessed that I might have predicted or been reborn, but what he didn't know, in my previous life, when you never lived to see Li Siheng ascend the throne. But
No.
he's not. Li Siheng is cruel, narrow-minded, and doesn't care for the people or the soldiers on the borders. Li Siqing, you can't lose. In the blink of an eye, I struggled free from the restraints behind me. In the moment of his hesitation, I plunged a dagger into Li Siheng's chest. Countless hidden blades came at me. I leapt forward, throwing myself toward the high platform below. Fortunately, Li Siqing caught me. The platform above was in chaos. Li Siheng, already wounded from Lu Ning's earlier assassination, started vomiting blood from the new wound. I am a woman of the Wen family. I grew up on horseback and had been to battlefields with my father and brothers. I had once severed the head of an enemy soldier in the midst of a chaotic battle. The memories of my past life confused Li Siheng. In his world, I had remained the sorrowful and self-pitying crown princess from the deep palace, and he forgot that I came from a military family, always carrying a blade, never unguarded. He thought of me as one of the spoils of war in the competition between the princes. Li Siheng, you don't deserve to love me, nor to rule as an emperor. From the southern side of the palace, the sound of horns was heard. It was brother leading the army, unstoppable. The sixth prince's forces were being pushed back step by step, with many soldiers already throwing down their weapons. This time, I had alerted father in advance. His military scouts had already gathered information about the enemy's movements and reported it to the emperor. Father had already rushed to the northern frontier days ahead of time. And brother, when father suggested to the emperor that he leave a reserve army to protect the capital, the emperor had agreed. Everything was coming to an end. I resigned from my position as the new crown princess, Li Siqing's wife. Little Wen Yu, isn't it good to be my crown princess? Li Siqing said, a hint of loneliness in his voice. In these 2 years, we had been more like comrades in arms than a married couple. We understood each other and fought side by side. The boy who once sat on my wall was now wearing the crown prince's ceremonial robe, imposing and mighty. I had a dream once that I married Li Siheng and became his crown princess, only to end up in a tragic fate. I'm not him. Li Siqing seemed a bit irritated. I knew. The reason the 9th prince was chosen from among the emperor's many sons was because, whether in the previous or current life, Li Siqing was not a venomous, ungrateful person. Before I married Li Siheng in my previous life, the 9th prince had sent me a letter. He said that the crown prince favored literature over martial arts, and that his maternal family had always looked down on those who wielded weapons. He warned me to be cautious in the Eastern Palace. I didn't listen, and now I regretted it too late. Being a crown princess, I had already done that and found no joy in it. Li Siqing is a good crown prince, and I hope he will one day be a good emperor. I wanted to return to the northern frontier to see my father and brothers. My family and the soldiers are there. If I hadn't entered the Eastern Palace in my past life, I would have gone with them to fight. I left a letter of divorce and smiled. Daring to leave a divorce letter for the future emperor, I must have a huge amount of courage. I just became the heir apparent, and you want to divorce the crown princess of the Duke of State? Aren't you afraid my position as crown prince will be shaken? Li Siqing complained. In truth, when we were together, it felt far more comfortable than when I was with Li Siheng. Li Siqing was clear-minded, clever, and shrewd, but he had never doubted me. But hearts change, and I no longer wanted to tie myself to any man. I helplessly said, then wait until your position is secure, and when you find the girl you want to marry, I'll bring it up. My Wen family, the Wen army, we serve the country, not because I'm the crown princess. Li Siqing casually set the letter of divorce aside. I found her. She says she wants to go to the northern frontier to fight. Then go ahead. He looked at me, his eyes as bright as before. Safe travels. Thank you, Your Highness. End of the full text.